The texts we read today as Aristotle are the products of a 700-year collective rewrite. We assume we are reading the raw thoughts of a 4th century BCE philosopher, but we are actually engaging with layers of interpretation added long after his death. In antiquity, the commentary was the formal structure for original philosophical theorizing. Rather than providing passive summaries, scholars used the word-by-word analysis of an authoritative text to develop their own complex ideas. This tradition emerged to fill a massive temporal gap. Centuries of silence separated Aristotle's life from the era of his most influential interpreters, leaving his original intentions open to reconstruction. Scholars stepped into this intellectual void and used Aristotle's often ambiguous phrasing to advance their own competing philosophical agendas. This triggered a period of rigorous exegetical labor that began in the 1st century BCE and continued through the end of late antiquity. To understand the foundations of Western philosophy, we must identify the commentators who reshaped Aristotle's work to preserve his authority for their own time. The 1st century BCE revival of Aristotelian philosophy began with an obsessive study of the categories, a short and baffling treatise on the nature of predication. Commentators divided the source text into a lemma, a direct quotation, followed by the exegesis, a word-by-word analysis. The physician Galen used this structure to create tiered teaching tools, varying the depth of the exegesis for students at different levels of knowledge. Early interpreters like Andronicus of Rhodes and Boethus of Sidon operated without a strict orthodoxy. They argued over the fundamental purpose of the categories and even debated its proper title. Rival Stoic philosophers used these same texts to launch critiques, arguing that the categories was an incomplete work if it was viewed strictly as a treatise on linguistics. In this era, the commentary served as a defensive tool used to justify why Aristotle deserved careful study at all. By the 2nd century CE, the practice of philosophy became institutionalized in Athens through imperial intervention. Emperor Marcus Aurelius established publicly salaried chairs for the 4 major philosophical schools, turning the explication of a founder's text into a state-funded profession. Alexander of Aphrodisias held the Aristotelian chair. His work was so respected that he became known simply as the most authentic interpreter. Alexander filtered Aristotle's works to isolate what he considered the genuine, distinctive thought of the master. He used the commentary to build a doctrinal wall around Aristotelian principles, defending them against the competing views of Platonists and Stoics. Alexander's work represents the final, most rigorous effort of the recovery phase, an attempt to protect the historical Aristotle from outside intellectual corruption. In late antiquity, Platonist philosophers like Porphyry and Simplicius took control of the Aristotelian commentary tradition. They operated under a directive called harmonization, intentionally interpreting Aristotle and Plato as part of a single, unified philosophical system. These Platonists absorbed Aristotle's works as mandatory prerequisites for their own theological studies, viewing his logic as a necessary tool for higher Platonic truth. Teachers established a strict reading curriculum, beginning at the foundation with Aristotelian logic, moving through ethics and physics. Aristotelian theology, found in the Metaphysics, sat at the peak, acting as the final gateway to the ultimate truth in the Platonic dialogues. Through harmonization, Aristotle's philosophy was rewritten to function as Plato's ultimate requirement. A specific textual debate illustrates how commentators altered Aristotle's meaning, his treatise on the soul, De Anima. Aristotle originally wrote De Anima as the theoretical foundation for his science of living beings, including animals and plants. However, commentators eventually removed Aristotle's biological works from the educational curriculum. This shift created a model of physics without biology. Studying the soul in isolation transformed it from a principle of living organisms into a purely psychological entity. This isolation focused attention on an ambiguity in De Anima 3.5, Aristotle's brief mention of an active intellect that is separate and unaffected. Alexander of Aphrodisias interpreted this active intellect as an external, non-human force, a divine god that interacts with humanity from the outside. Themistius proposed an alternative, mapping the active intellect as the highest part of the human soul itself, rather than an external deity. Because the commentators stripped away the biological context, these few ambiguous lines were free to become the foundations for divergent theological systems. As the Greek tradition faded, the focus of Aristotelian study moved into the Latin-speaking West. Boethius became the critical link, bridging the philosophy of late antiquity with the emerging medieval world. Boethius translated the categories and the organon into Latin, preserving the harmonized curriculum for future generations. He also introduced dual-tiered commentaries, writing both basic and advanced versions of the same text to standardize how the logic was taught. Medieval Europe inherited this curated, heavily annotated framework rather than the raw source material of the 4th century BCE. When we read Aristotle today, we are engaging with a philosophical palimpsest built over 700 years of relentless exegetical labor.